Hello, World History 1 students. This is Mr. Everton, and for some reason, I cannot get my face to appear in the bottom right-hand corner of the video. I'm having technical difficulties, so this video will not feature my face. You'll just hear my voice, which will have to be enough. I'm sorry. Today's video is going to be about East Africa. Last time, we talked about West Africa, where Ghana, Mali, and Songhai became African kingdoms that were very wealthy and prosperous by controlling the gold and salt trade of the trans-Saharan trade routes. Today, we're going to talk about East Africa. We're going to talk about three places: Nubia, Axum, and Zimbabwe. And when we talk about East Africa, there's an important geographic feature you already know about that we need to discuss. And I'm sure it's on the tip of your tongue, but Gary, the honor student, is here to tell you what he knows it to be. What is it, Gary? Yes, Gary, it is the Nile River. I'm glad that you remember that from the beginning of this year. You've really retained your learning. Yes, the Nile River is an important geographic feature of East Africa, and it's going to really affect this group of people, the Nubians. You can see the Nile River pictured in the map on the left. The Nubians were just south of Egypt. We're going way back to the beginning of class when we talked about ancient Egypt. Just south of ancient Egypt was a civilization called Nubia on the southern part of the Nile. It was separated from Egypt by something called cataracts. A cataract is like a waterfall, and as you're traveling on the Nile River, when you get to a cataract, it is a barrier that prevents your boat from sailing down the river further. You have to get your boat out of the water, go around the cataract, and put your boat back in the water. So it operates as a natural barrier that separated Egypt from Nubia. The Egyptians called this land Kush, and so for a long time, European historians also would refer to Nubia as Kush. The Nubians fought many wars against Egypt. Many of those wars they lost, and they became an Egyptian colony for a while. Off and on, they were an Egyptian colony, and here in the image, you can see a painting of some Nubians bringing tributes to the Egyptians, bringing them gold and a variety of other things. But eventually, later in their history, the Nubians were able to conquer Egypt. In 750 BCE, they actually conquered Egypt, and Egypt became a Nubian colony, very briefly. Because of their interactions with Egypt, Nubia was heavily affected by Egyptian culture. And here you can see the ruins of some Nubian pyramids. They're smaller than the Egyptian ones, but they had similar style of pyramid architecture that they created. They also had a religion that they established that was influenced by Egyptian religion, and they had their own form of writing, much as the Egyptians had their own form of writing. We know that the Nubians made iron. We found archaeological evidence of iron smelting, which is where they have to heat the iron up very hot to burn off impurities and try to harden it. And we know that they were able to establish trade routes to the Mediterranean Sea along the Nile River. So that's the Nubians. Much later, we get to Axum. And just a brief thing about pronunciation and writing. It's pronounced Axum, and you can write it either with an X or you can pronounce it with an AKS. Either way is okay. I think I mostly will be using an X. Axum is located in the Ethiopian highlands, around the same area as Nubia generally. Here you can see the Ethiopian highlands. These are mountains in East Africa, and this is also along the Nile River, a little bit further south from Nubia. Eventually, later, it shows you this map is from 8300 to 700. In that time period, Axum came along and did conquer Nubia and brought it into Axum's kingdom. And Axum was a prosperous kingdom that, again, benefited from trade along the Nile River and also on the Red Sea. And that taxing that trade is what made the kingdom of Axum very successful. The main thing you need to know about Axum is that it's a Christian kingdom. Here you can see St. George's Church, which is a Christian church in Axum that was carved out of a single piece of stone. You can see how they carved down into the earth through the stone in order to make this church, which is crazy. Axum came into contact with the Byzantine Empire through their trade routes on the Red Sea and along the Nile River. And because of this, they adapted Byzantine religion. This was before Islam had become a force in this part of the world. Christianity was becoming the dominant religion in Egypt and in the Middle East prior to Islam showing up. And so Axum adopted Christianity. As Islam became a thing around 600 AD, sorry for the bell, most of the rest of Africa and the Middle East converted to Islam, but Axum remained a Christian kingdom and became the only Christian kingdom in Africa during this time period. So the main thing you need to remember about Axum is that it is a Christian kingdom in Africa. And here you can see a church in modern-day Ethiopia, which is where Axum was located. And the architectural style should hopefully be familiar to you. This is very similar to Byzantine-style architecture with the colorful domes and the crosses on the top. Finally, I want to talk about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is further south and is located between two rivers, the Zambezi and the Limpopo. And the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers were what made agriculture possible in Zimbabwe. Also, they had iron tools, we know, which we believe their iron tools migrated through something called the Bantu migrations, came from West Africa south gradually in a process that took many hundreds of years. They were able to use those iron tools in order to successfully engage in agriculture, but they also benefited from trade. The people of Zimbabwe had valuable natural resources like these elephant tusks, which were sold as ivory, which could be used to make all kinds of different valuable trade goods like decorative sword handles and piano keys are made out of ivory. And then gold, which, again, we've talked about gold last time and how valuable it is. This wealth from the trade of gold and ivory led to the establishment of a wealthy capital city called Great Zimbabwe. And you can see the stonework of Great Zimbabwe pictured here. Great Zimbabwe is known for its stonework. Here you can see it from the air in this shot of something called the Great Enclosure. When Europeans first found this stonework, they didn't believe that native Africans had done it. They thought that Europeans in some way found their way into southern Africa in order to create these advanced stone buildings. It's only later in the 20th century when archaeologists were able to overcome their racism enough to realize that indigenous African peoples had actually created these impressive stone monuments. So to summarize, today we talked about Axum. We talked about Nubia and its how it was influenced by Egypt. We talked about Axum and how it adopted Christianity because of its contact with the Byzantine Empire and the Mediterranean Sea. And finally, we talked about Zimbabwe, which prospered because of its trade with the coast and is known for its impressive stone architecture. Thanks very much for watching, and I will talk to you next time.